I know it's hot, but we'll get started. We got a great program today, and we welcome everybody for being here for Gear Up 2020 Rapid Infrastructure Goals for Nashville's Optimal Future. So just a real quick backstory. I was having breakfast one day with Mr. Riebling and Mr. Sturdivant at my favorite restaurant for breakfast, the Pancake Pantry, and I noticed that the mayor's advance team was walking in the door, and I said, oh, the mayor's coming to have breakfast. She lives in the neighborhood. I thought that was nice and appreciate her supporting our tenant. And I said, oh, hey, Rich, y'all's boss is here. She says, yes, she's having breakfast with you. And I said, oh, really? Okay, great. So glad I had that on my schedule. So that was the beginning to where we are today, and it was really wonderful foresight on Mayor Megan Berry's part. So anyway, subject matter today offers the best of what ULI does: collaboration, facilitating communication, best practices to build a thriving and sustaining city. ULI also offers membership involvement in this program, and this, what we've done here with the city is sort of the epitome of that. Access to expert resources and Gabe. Networking, a lot of the people that got involved got to meet a lot of people, and that was great. And it really epitomizes the value of being a ULI member, which we think is great. ULI is always recognized nationally and one of the most quoted sources on planning, growth, development, and its foundation is infrastructure, and the core of Gear Up 2020 sort of is at that point. As manager of this program for Metro, we were very fortunate to have Gabe Klein as our expert consultant, equally as fortunate to have Kim Hawkins, who agreed at my request to be the chair of this program. Everybody knows Kim and her perseverance, and she's done a wonderful job. All the members of the committee are listed in your program, so feel free to read them. I think Gabe and Kim will talk about that. And then skipping into our annual sponsors. Thank you, annual sponsors. I guess everybody saw the boards. We're going to kick that annual sponsorship program under Steve Kalinsky's leadership here soon. And the sponsors make it possible. We set a goal last year, we exceeded it. I'm sure Steve and myself and Rose will set another goal, and we'll hopefully exceed it with your help this year. We're really excited about that, and that'll start next month. A couple of save the dates to put in your calendar. I think you got a lot of this information, but I'll just point them out. December 1st, we're having our members only open house. September 8th is my birthday. Wait a minute, no. Gathering of the district council. So yeah. And also you'll learn about some newest initiatives that we're starting this year: Women in Leadership, Young Leaders Development 101, biannual new members orientation and companion members, where you bring a guest to our programs. And then on October 20th, we're having a affordable workforce housing program, which will be great. The legendary Jonathan Rose will be leading that, and if you haven't ever heard him speak or read about him, it will be a wonderful program, and we all know that's such a hot topic in our city right now, and a lot of people are working very hard on that as we go. And then, the good news just keeps on coming. We obviously announced the spring 2019 conference at the Excellence in Development program back in the spring, and just the other day we get a call and said, oh, by the way, we're having our governor's program here in Nashville, and we say, oh, well, okay, great, we'll be glad to host it. That's wonderful. So all the top people in leadership from ULI will be at that program. And I think I announced this in the spring, but I want to announce it again. Bert Matthews, where's Bert? Bert, stand up. Bert has just been appointed a trustee of ULI National. So it's always nice to have friends at the top, and I think we also owe Bert a great deal of gratitude. He was one of the founders of this chapter, and here we are 9 years later. And Bert, I don't think you ever thought we'd gotten here 9 years ago, but here we are, and we're thriving. We're one of the most looked at chapters in all of the national program. And just yesterday, talking to one of the ladies in Georgetown, she was asking about what we're talking about here today, and she said, oh, well, there's not a better potential recipient for what we call our impact awards than this. So hopefully we'll be in line. I told her we were running out of shelf space for all our awards, but we'd figure out where to put them. Anyway, thank you so much for coming, and Thank you, Mayor Berry, for your leadership, and I think Mayor Berry wants to say a few words. Thanks.
So Jimmy didn't hear me when I said, does that impact award come with cash? Okay, please. Thanks to all of you for being here today. I want to give a quick shout out to some of the other folks who are with me today. We have some other elected officials who are joining us. Councilmember John Cooper is here. John, I know you're somewhere. Councilmember Mina Johnson, Councilmember Freddie O'Connell, Councilmember Berkeley Allen, Councilmember Angie Henderson, Councilmember Kathleen Murphy, Councilmember Russ Pulley, Councilmember Jim Schulman. I think I got everybody. Did I miss any of the electeds? Excellent. And we also have some folks from the mayor's office that I also want to give a quick shout out to. I have a great team. And you know how important having a great team is, and that makes all the difference. Rich Riebling is here, Debbie Del Mason is here, Mark Sturdivant is here, Mary Beth Eichert is here, and Sean is right there taking a picture. We also have some of the interns from the mayor's office I saw. We have a great internship this program. If you're a mayor intern, just raise your hand and wave. Thank you. Matthew, appreciate you. And we have some former council members here. Former member Peter Westerholm, who I had the pleasure of serving with, and former member Sean McGuire, who I also had the pleasure of serving with, are also here. So it's great that you all are still very much engaged in what happens in our community. And we also have some department heads here. So I know Mark Macy's here. I saw Steve Bland is here, and Doug Sloan are here. So thank you all for coming, because obviously this is a larger collaboration and conversation. We're going to get a chance to hear from Gabe here in a second. And you may remember the first thing I did when I came into office was ask all of the departments to reach out and ask their folks to join ULI, because I think that partnership is so critical. And we're very fortunate. We're growing. You've seen this. Our population is growing. Our economy is strong. I was at a U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting about 2 weeks ago, and there was a whole program on what to do with abandoned buildings. And I was standing with some of my other mayors, and they're like, "Let's go to that." I'm like, I don't need to. And our budget this year included $121 million of new revenue that came without a tax increase, which I think is pretty phenomenal. And I think that is absolutely a testament to all of the great growth that is happening. But we also know that with growth comes a lot of opportunity. And while we have not necessarily had a concrete action that keeps and makes sure that our infrastructure is keeping pace with our growth, that's where we have to get our arms around. And this is going to help us do that. We've had Nashville Next, we've had In Motion, we've got master plans for sidewalks and bikeways and greenways and parks, and all of those together are key and important, and we're working on moving those forward. But at the end of the day, you actually have to take some action. And that was really brought home to me also yesterday. I was up in New York doing a panel for the New York Times on tactical urbanism, and that the idea that if your government isn't responsive to what you need, that citizens oftentimes will pick up a spray can and spray some crosswalk, which Mark Macy was having a conniption when I was saying that earlier. But it's true. So we have to make sure that we're responsive and we are absolutely addressing the needs of growth, because if our most vulnerable citizens, like our seniors and our children and our people with disabilities, can't walk across a busy intersection and get across safely, then we failed. And if we can't find an efficient way to get people around, and if we fall short of doing that, we're not going to have that great growth that we continue to have. And if we do convert all of our open spaces to development, then we're not going to have that preservation for our wildlife, stormwater mitigation, local agriculture, all the tree components that keep us cool, and we become a less attractive city for everybody. And if we don't give people enough places to get exercise and maintain a healthy lifestyle, then we've also failed as a community. So when I heard that ULI, Nashville, and Gabe Klein were going to help my administration with some infrastructure goals, I was really excited. And so I see this as an opportunity for Nashville to see what's possible. And there is a lot in this of what is possible. When you hear this, I think you guys are going to be blown away. We're already doing some of this stuff, but the opportunity for collaboration between metro departments, the private sector, and my office is unstoppable, because at the end of the day, all of us have to work together. And that's what we're going to do. So we've already applied for some of the state funding to get us started on a transportation demand management program that Gabe's going to talk about. And a lot of the ideas about engaging youth fit right into the Opportunity Now initiative that we are going to kick off, where we're going to put 10,000 of our kids to work next summer, and I need every one of you in this room to hire at least 10 of them. And I think you'll be very excited to hear what this report has. So I'm going to invite Kim up, because Kim is raising her hand. And we're going to hear from Kim, and then I'm going to sit here and listen, and I can't wait. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mayor Berry. Last December, just after Gabe Klein spoke to ULI Nashville, that was right after the release of his book, Startup City, the mayor and her staff suggested the partnership of Gabe Klein with ULI Nashville to set community infrastructure goals. So that was a pretty gutsy thing to do, really, to go to the private development community in Nashville, and that means all of you, and ask for your thoughts about how the city might function better, for how we might improve our overall infrastructure. And over the last 6 months, you've all done just that. So there were 15 ULI members that were on the Gear Up 2020 committee with that vision to develop an infrastructure as integrated systems that really function synergistically. And those committee members, if you are one of those 15, would you just raise your hand? I think almost everybody's here. Thank you so much for what you've done. And as committee members, you also conducted 49 additional interviews with other ULI members. You engaged the ULI Nashville Transportation Action Council. There were also interviews with 17 different Metro department heads and personnel. Bottom line, there was a lot of great feedback. And if you participated in one or more of those interviews, we really appreciate your help. So the Gear Up 2020 committee then spent a lot of time making certain that the information that they heard was consistent with all of the other initiatives that were already going on in Nashville, and based on Nashville Next, that they carried out some of the goals of Nashville Next, that it was relevant based on In Motion, based on Moving Forward, and so many other things going on. So for a number of months, that committee really was the hands and feet, the ears and eyes for Gabe Klein, gathering information, sending it on to Gabe for him to ponder, for him to challenge, and finally for him to offer ways to innovate based on what he'd done with other municipalities and what he's seeing around the world. So Gabe provided a number of early recommendations back in April, and I'm happy to say, as the mayor said, a number of those have already begun to be acted on. And for each of you later today, the full report, which includes 33 different recommendations and SMART goals, will be available on ULI Nashville's website. And now to introduce Gabe. And I love starting it by saying that Gabe grew up in his family's bike shop. And I know I see Nora here and a lot of other bike advocates, and that's just kind of always nice to know. So Gabe's been the vice president of Zipcar, the head of the DOT for Chicago and for DC, on the board of Streets Blog and NACTO, but Gabe's not a traffic engineer, and he's not a planner. He's really a tech-savvy entrepreneur, and he has that very entrepreneurial mindset. So Gabe believes in setting high, specific, measurable goals with a specific time frame and encourages that they are accomplished quickly. Well, all of that really resonated with our mayor and her staff when she heard him. And in Nashville, particularly these days, time's a-wastin'. So with that, Gabe Klein.
Said it crashed, but it didn't. All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. Thanks, Mayor Berry, Kim, all the sub-committee members, and everybody that worked on this project. I mean, I was steering it, but there were so many people that made this happen. And it is really brave that Mayor Berry and Mark and Mary Beth and the whole team engaged me to come in and then didn't edit anything. Didn't, said, hey, go to it. Bring us your best and boldest ideas. Look at all of our plans and be critical if you want to be. And that's unusual. I think that's really great. I also want to thank, Kim and Rose and Jimmy and all the people that I got to interface with and work with on a regular basis. I don't know if Kim knew what she was undertaking, how much work this would be. But one of the things I learned also coming to Nashville and spending some time and digging through everything is there's some great long-term plans. I mean, really, really good, high-quality stuff. Nashville Next, I think, is one of the best long-term plan documents I've actually seen. It's that good. And one of the challenges, though, is breaking that down and figuring out, okay, how do we take this 10, 20, 30-year plan and break it down into manageable chunks that we can execute on? And so that was a big part of this challenge. Something else that I learned coming to Nashville is how much fun it is. You know, and it's funny because I wrote this book, Startup City, Inspiring Private and Public Entrepreneurship, Getting Projects Done and Having Fun. And I think Nashville really embodies that. It really is fun. In fact, I was on a lift, in a lift, not on top of a lift. I was in a lift. I actually would have walked, but it was hot and I was late. And the driver, she said, so what are you doing? Where are you from? I said, I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm doing some work for the mayor and the city. And she's like, Mayor Barry kicks ass. You know? She said, I met her at a roller derby event, and she was really supportive. And then she said something about down with the patriarchy, and I sort of, you know, tuned out at that point. But there is a... Bury the patriarchy. That's what it was. Okay, that is what she said. So anyway, so this is a unique time, I think, in Nashville's history. And when a new leader comes in, it's a great opportunity to make a fresh assessment of what's going on. I also want to thank all the department heads. We got a lot of information from planning, from public works. We even talked to the police department. I mean, everybody. And I know having a quote-unquote expert come from out of town and come assess everything that's going on when you've been working hard every day running your department, as I have, I've run 2 of these, can be a bit of a pain. So thank you for your patience, and hopefully this will be worth it, because the goal is to make everybody's job easier, not harder. And you know, I focus a lot on SMART goals, and this is nothing new. In fact, a lot of what you'll see in this report is nothing new. It's just being put together in a framework that's specific to Nashville. And you know, SMART goals have been around for at least 50 years. But you'd be surprised how many organizations that we've all worked within where you don't speak that language on a daily basis. You know, and I think it's a cultural shift where everything you talk about doing revolves around it being specific, measurable, agreed upon with the party that's carrying it out, realistic, and time-based. The most important thing being time-based. You know, because psychologically, if we as people don't have a goal, it's amazing how we don't hit that goal. We don't know when we're supposed to hit it, and often we don't know what it is. The other thing that we try to do, no matter how technical things were, we're talking about high-tech stuff, public-private partnerships are very important, you know, working together to make change faster. But fundamentally, it's really all about people. It's all about the citizens of Nashville, as Mayor Barry said. It's about quality of life. And if we're not delivering on that, if that's not our first goal, like many of you run companies, and the focus is on the customer. And for the mayor and the council members, the focus is on the citizen and working for the greater good maybe instead of profit. But ultimately, it's about people. And we've got to put them first in everything that we do. So that has to be a North Star. When we set out, we said, okay, what are the initial areas of study that we want to look at? We didn't necessarily address all of these things. But we looked at transportation and public safety, infrastructure and utilities, quality of open space, and all of those sub-issues. So we ended up actually adding government reinvention, just because we realized that some of the goals that we came up with along the way didn't really fit into this. It was really about reinventing government, which is a very hot topic these days. And we have a new generation of mayors that are very open-minded. They're open-minded to taking more of a private sector approach to get things done on behalf of citizens, and working maybe across the aisle, working with NGOs, philanthropy, the federal government, and the private sector to get things done. And then we had our mission or set of missions and guiding principles. And there are different names for these things, like No More Accidents is really a way of saying Vision Zero, but some people don't know what Vision Zero is. And I think this is really important because from the standpoint of our frame of reference, we have grown in this culture to accept a certain amount of death on our roads. And if you've heard me talk before here in Nashville, I usually start off talking about this because it's really, really a crisis. It's the biggest health crisis that we face worldwide and in the U.S. The number one killer of young people is not HIV, it's not even gun death, it's car death. And we lose 1.24 million people a year worldwide, 32,000 in the U.S., and actually, unfortunately, last year, 35,000, because gas was inexpensive and more people drove. So we really do have a health crisis, and we have to get it under control. Equity is very important, and equity really needs to be built into everything that we do. So as the mayor said, you know, if an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old can't cross the street, or a disabled person, or we're just making investments in one community and not another, then we're not really truly serving Nashville. And those investments pay huge dividends when we make them equally throughout the city. Now, that's not to say that certain things, like for instance a bike share program, you might start in the densest area of the city so that you can then spread it out into all other areas of the city. Some of it depends on business models. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I will say that we also looked at forward-compatible technology and design. And actually, Jimmy can tell you a funny story about when we first met a couple years ago, and I was down here, and I said that building parking garages was like, is the press here? Yeah, oh well. Building parking garages was like pissing in the wind. And he came up to me, looked all depressed, and he said, well, I have to build this parking garage. And then we talked about how you could build it in such a way that it could be converted to office space or living space for people instead of storage for cars. And it was about a year later, he came up to me looking much less sullen, much more excited. And he said, Gabe, guess what? I did what we talked about. And now I've plumbed it, I've put electric in, and I can convert it for a much lower cost. I'm basically ready for the future. So that's very important. It's not just about technology, it's about design. Land use reform. You know, there's a saying, Jeff Tumlin, I think, popularized this, but it was originally from a planner named Larry Beasley, that there are no transportation problems, there are just land use problems. And that's really true. I mean, we've sprawled ourselves so all over the country, and we've exported this planning theory all over the world. And that's really what's caused a lot of our problems, that we live so far from our services and our work. So in our thinking about that, you know, as much as we can build density near services and transit and bike facilities and so on and so forth, we make people's lives easier. But also from an equity standpoint, we bring people's costs down. When I was running the DOT in Washington, D.C., I learned that east of the river, people were spending up to 53% of their income on transportation because they didn't have some of the great transit services, and so they were forced to buy a car. And when you're forced to buy a car, AAA estimates at $900 a month, that gets really expensive when you're only making $18,000 a year, right? Or if the bus is only running once an hour, and you're an hourly worker and you have to be there on time, you miss the bus 3 times, you lose your job. So there's all kinds of things that are important there. And streets and public spaces as job creators. You know, we often don't think about the fact that our streets can be used for so many things. We think, okay, this is a way to move people in cars. And the reality is when we look at them as engines of economic growth, as places for people to play, people to hang out, spontaneous interactions and so on, all of a sudden business goes up. And there's no accident. It's tied to safety as well. When you make a place safe and fun and interesting, people actually slow down and hang out there. When they hang out there, if there are amenities and services, they will spend their money there. So again, it's not really rocket science. I'm not going to go through all this, but you can read the report. This was our timeline. Let's see, I think I first met with you, Mayor, in November at the National League of Cities, and then in December we started talking about this, and then we kicked this off January, February, and here we are. We sent some early recommendations in April, and then we really spent a lot of time fleshing stuff out through May, June, and July. And there were a lot of interviews in the early portion. What we tried to do is to make this simple and concise. So for each goal, we tried to limit it to 1 page, because if we couldn't explain it in 1 page, then maybe it wasn't executable in a short time frame. And we wanted to force ourselves to be really clear and cogent. And we had one simple chart that we used that basically laid out what was the timeline with some flexibility, who had control, because obviously if the feds have control or the state, it's going to take longer. What's the cost? Is there an opportunity for P3 for us to work with the private sector? Is there a revenue opportunity? Is there a positive ROI in this project? What are the politics and optics of it? Because the reality is if the optics or politics are really bad, it can be hard to get done, particularly in short order. Which guiding principles that we laid out does this fit into? Who owns it? And unfortunately, a bunch were owned by the mayor's office, at least to coordinate because they span multiple agencies. Related recommendations, and then net, is this a win-win, or a win-win-win? Like, is this something that's going to benefit everybody or just some parties? And if it benefits some parties, it doesn't mean that we don't want to do it, but we just want to be cognizant of that. And the ROI piece is really important. And I've been working a bit down in Tampa where Governor Rick Scott wants to spend $9.3 billion to expand the expressway. And they're going to take out 140 homes. They're going to close a bunch of businesses. It's basically urban renewal in the 21st century. It's a real disaster. And it's really about paying back the road builders and people that supported him in his campaign, if I can just be blunt. So we've been pressing them to do an ROI analysis, and they won't do it. And it's pretty simple. And this is, fiscal conservatives that are pushing this project. But the reality is if you did a cost-benefit analysis and you took that $9.3 billion and you put it into a tram system in Tampa, right? New parks, schools, all of that stuff, the returns would be astronomical. So it's really important to look at that. And in fact, they're going to have negative returns from the expressway because they'll, as you guys know, they will kill the real estate values around that freeway, which are already very low, but they'll get even lower. So I'm going to dive right in the interest of time. And I have to say, it was very hard to pick what to talk about because, each of the goals was really important, but we only have 45 minutes, and we wanted to give you guys a sort of taste, a smattering of what we worked on, and then let you look at it when it comes out at 12 p.m. So this was open space, and those are the 5 recommendations that we made. Also, before I jump in, I just want to say these are recommendations. So the goal here was to unearth possibility, make recommendations, but it's really up to Metro to answer the departments, the council to work together and say, we like this idea, we don't like this idea, we like aspects of this idea, we think this is realistic, we don't think this is realistic. So this is not prescriptive. But I didn't look at the Nashville Next transportation specific goals until the end because I didn't want to bias what I was going to write. And I was amazed at how many of the things actually, particularly in transportation, that I recommended that were also Nashville Next, which said to me, okay, we're on the right track here.
Is that Jimmy's Garage?
That is Jimmy's Garage. Well, I was thinking about Jimmy's Garage when I put that in. But there are literally hundreds of parking facilities in Metro, private and publicly owned, large and small surface lots, garages, and the fact is that things are going to change over the next decade, and we've got billions of dollars wrapped up in this space, and this is in cities all over the United States and all over the world. And so, we have to start thinking about what do we want to do with this space when autonomous cars come, and before that, really. These parking garages can be used and surface lots for much better and higher uses. And when I say before, I live in Washington, D.C., which is obviously pretty dense. We have a pretty robust transit system, although it's falling apart, and that's another story. But 88% of new residents moving to the District of Columbia do not bring a car or buy a car. So the trend's already happening because of Lyft and Uber and bike share and bike lanes and all of this stuff. But it's going to move faster and faster. So, how do we take this space and how do we start thinking proactively about what we want to do with it? And I know that the mayor's passionate about housing, affordable housing, equity. There's big opportunities there. With surface lots, there's opportunities to create more open space. And so we recommend, first of all, starting out by making sure that there's an inventory, a correct inventory of everything, which is harder than it sounds. Really going through and building a GIS-based database or taking what you have and making sure that it's completely correct. And then, of course, once you have something to measure, then you can start cross-referencing with where you have need. Where do you have housing need? Where do you have open space needs? Where do you have active transportation needs? And then there's definitely an opportunity for public-private partnership here. In fact, I was in Shanghai a few weeks ago speaking for the ULI Southeast Asian Summit, and I had a very wealthy investor come up to me afterwards and say, hey, I think there's something here. I think we should go to every city and talk to them about buying all their parking garages. Now, I think that's a great idea, but I would like the cities to be as educated as possible as to the value and opportunity of that before the private sector comes to you, and they will. So there's lots more in the report. Also, if you are building garages, as Jimmy did, let's think about what they're going to be in 10 years, and let's plan for that. Okay. We all love our parks, and they're becoming more and more important as our cities get denser. I came from Chicago most recently, where we have we have now 571 parks. And there's a lot of problems in Chicago, fiscally and otherwise. But the parks are sort of this beacon of hope, because the parks are beautiful. They're a respite from the craziness of the city, and they have their own dedicated funding stream. In this case, they have a very small sales tax that's dedicated to parks. But by creating an enterprise fund and a dedicated funding stream, meaning that if they start generating revenue, it can go back into parks, it gives them a motivation to add services. I know there's been a prohibition, I think, on advertising in parks. There's not a lot of food service in parks. There is bike share in parks. And we don't want to clutter our parks up necessarily with junk. But on the other hand, we did hear from people when we interviewed them that there's a dearth of amenities. That you go to the park, but then you have to leave. You have to leave to go get food. So we're going to talk more about enterprise funds in just a bit, but we think there's a big opportunity to utilize sponsorships, foundation support, events like we had Lollapalooza in our parks. Not only did they pay millions of dollars to use the facility, but you had millions of people coming to the city and spending tons of money. So taking a fresh look at how to utilize our parks, or at least some of our parks, how to add services, and how to generate more revenue to make them self-sustaining, and potentially to build more of a capital slush fund to build more parks. This is a placeholder name, Spaces and Places. So if you hate it, we can change it. But the idea here is to start thinking about public space differently. Whether it's parking space, alleyways, and start thinking about how can we use some of this space for people instead of defaulting to cars. And it's really that simple, but by formalizing a program, and you can do it, like in Chicago, it's called Activate, and it's a partnership with a nonprofit, and also with a private sector player to put in advertising. And it's a platform for entrepreneurship, equity, technology, and services in the parks, as well as in public spaces. And when I say parks or public spaces, there are a lot of these spaces that are sort of not one or the other. They're sort of these third places. They're these plazas that need to be activated. And in Chicago, we had 56 of those. Some of them were going to generate a lot of revenue. Some of them were out in the middle of nowhere. But if you put the right the right P3 together, you can have somebody potentially take all of them and activate them. There's probably 20 different ways to execute a program like this, and it can be done very simply, or it can be much more elaborate. In Chicago, we started very simply, and we just said, hey, let's let the Business Improvement District, let's let them work with local retailers, community members to enhance public spaces. And what we will do is remove the red tape and give clear design guidelines. So that's a simpler way to execute that. All right, let's jump into infrastructure and utilities. I put up solar panels, even though we didn't actually make a recommendation on solar. But I put that in for a reason, because I do think it's important to recognize that the utility business is going to change dramatically over the next 25 years is what people estimate. And that renewable energy will actually basically provide most of our need. And what's interesting is that in 2016, for the first time, transportation is throwing off more CO2 than power plants. Now, this sounds bad, but actually, the CO2 from transportation has been pretty flat. But because of renewable energy, energy is dropping like a stone, which is a great thing, because that's been our biggest problem. But when we looked at this, we had to look sort of broadly, and we started looking at street trees. And one of the things that we heard from people, and we talked to a lot of different types of people about this, is we don't really know who controls them. You know, it seems to be sort of a little bit over here, a little bit over there. This tree might belong to this person or that person. And so there are many entities involved, but it wasn't clear to people who actually had ownership. And we know there's 2,000 urban trees in the downtown that the Department of Public Works has. We also know that there's an aerial imagery assessment, and that 47.3% of Metro is tree covered, and 15.3% of the public way is covered by tree canopy. So our recommendation was that the mayor's office look at how many entities control landscaping and trees in public space and Metro properties, and then based on the results of that process, a decision can be made about whether to consolidate that. And in Washington, I had an urban forestry program. And then we also had some nonprofits like Casey Trees. And we would partner to basically make sure that we took care of all the trees in the right-of-way. And one of the things that they're working on now, which I think is very exciting, is something we talked about 5-6 years ago, is actually to transfer a lot of the sort of day-to-day taking care of the trees over to the community. It's getting really hot. It's going to be 100 degrees here the day after tomorrow. It's going to be 100 degrees in DC this week. Even with the irrigation systems that we may or may not have, our trees are dying in a lot of areas because they aren't being watered. Using sensors, you can actually find out when a tree needs to be watered. So using social media, sensors, you could have kids watering the trees, and you could track who's taking care of what, and you could even pay them. I was in Singapore last week, and they gave me this cool little watch, and it's basically like an inexpensive Fitbit. They've given these out to 150,000 people, and they're all competing in Singapore to see who can walk the most steps. And if you hit certain goals, they'll give you $30 coupons. They'll basically pay you, right? So government is reinventing itself and starting to think about how do we empower the public to deliver more services instead of delivering all the services ourselves centrally. Or instead of building a new highway, what if we paid people to ride their bikes? I know it sounds crazy, but people are really looking at this, and you can use technology to do this. So the reason I'm talking about this is if you consolidate things like street trees into one place and landscaping and all of that, then there's more opportunity to leverage that and bring technology to it and involve the public more. All right, in the interest of time, I better get moving here. Account and accommodate for all users for all construction projects via public way coordination, proper regulations, and pricing. So when I got here, actually a couple times I've stayed here, and I remember I was staying at a hotel here downtown, and I came out front, and the sidewalk was closed. And the sidewalk was closed across the street, and there was basically nowhere to walk. You had to walk in the street. And so I think it's very important that we set rules for the utilities, for ourselves, and for anybody, developers working in the public way, so that the assets are priced appropriately. And if you want to take, for instance, a block out of service for 3 months, that we charge you, and we charge you a little bit more every week. And I'll tell you what we learned doing this in Chicago. People who used to take 3 months to take an entire lane of traffic would take a week. And instead of staging all of their construction equipment in the public way, they just move it over onto the lot. So we learned actually that they didn't really need the public way, but we had priced it so cheaply that they were just going to use it because it was cheaper than using anything else. But that public way is extremely valuable. And when we do things like that, unfortunately, people get hit by cars. So some of these are actually pretty simple. Now the execution of them, a little more complex, takes some thought, but very exciting. And there's technology you can bring to this, so it can all be sort of handled in a GIS mapping environment. You have new regs, and there's a pricing system that people can very easily understand. Reinforce and expand low-impact development standards. I'll just say here that they're great standards, and I learned that through this project. And I think there's some enhancements we can make, incentives we can make, and just making sure that we force developers and everybody to adhere, as well as ourselves in Metro. So we in the government should be adhering to the same standards. And my friend Leah Treat, who worked with me in DC and Chicago, runs the Portland DOT. They have now defaulted to LID on all street work. So basically all new streetscape projects where they're completely tearing up the street and rebuilding it, which you should do every 15 to 30 years, they use bioswales and rain gardens. No more gutters, curb and gutter. So that's pretty exciting. So the other thing also is that they're great examples from around the country and around the world. And in every goal, we tried to put examples from other places, Oakland or Portland, like cities often, that are doing great work. Create a streetlight master plan for Metro. This is another example of just needing some consistency and continuity, where you know that in this particular type of street, you get cobras, and in this particular type of street, you get this type of ornamental lighting. And we make sure that it's clear who controls all the lights and the relationship with NES, and there is an opportunity for public-private partnerships as well. There are people that will come in and take over your streetlights or do a concession agreement, upgrade them all to LED, and the more that you have an accurate inventory and you actually have a master plan, the easier it is. When I got to Chicago, we had no idea how many lights we had. And we wanted to do something cool with it, but we couldn't. Because without having a basic understanding of our own lighting system, nobody else was going to bid on it. All right, government reinvention and P3 recommendations. So there's 1, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 here. Creating enterprise funds. And I have to tell you, a lot of governments don't do this. Most don't do it because they like to sort of pour all the money into the general fund. It's just easier. It's actually a little bit less transparent. And by doing this, though, what you do is you create this entrepreneurial spirit within the agencies. Like if Public Works knows that, hey, if we generate more money from parking, that money's going to go back into the agency, and that can be our 20% federal aid match to pave more roads, that's going to be pretty exciting. Now, it is a pain, but it's also a great way to track what's really going on in the agencies and what is the sort of profit and loss statement as you would have in a private sector company. So there's a lot in there, but it's a pretty simple idea. It's basically you eat what you kill, right? And if you want more money in your agency and you're one of these agencies that has a lot of assets, you have public space, you have permitting fees, make sure you're doing a great job for the customer and maybe you can raise the price. And what we learned with our parking system in some of the cities that I've worked in is that people are willing to pay more if you make it work really well. And we'll talk more about parking in just a minute. Smart cities. So I was actually in San Francisco yesterday at the Automated Vehicle Symposium. Secretary Fox was there. He was talking about the Smart Cities Challenge. Look, 77 out of 78 cities are disappointed with how the Smart Cities Challenge went. I know somebody in one city that was told the day before they were getting the money, and then went to another city the next day. So you can imagine how they felt. But here's the wonderful thing about that program, is that a year ago, many cities didn't know what a smart city really meant. And to be honest with you, it's constantly changing. So we're constantly evolving what it means. But you do have a good plan. And you've got Lyft with operations here, and you've got this burgeoning tech and startup scene. So it's really about innovative finance. And I think that if we reach out, there are private sector entities, which I think they're still figuring out how to do it. But over the next year, we'll figure out how to come in and help to implement smart cities. And I think it's very important to have an open platform. We've been talking a lot about this at NACTO. So you don't want a firm like Cisco or Google or somebody to come in and say, hey, we're going to own the platform, we're going to own the data, but we'll do it for you, right? You want to own the platform, own the data, and you want to be able to plug in local companies too. So there's a way to sort of thread this needle, but it's a very exciting time. And I think Nashville can be a leader in smart cities, particularly if it's going to be making a lot of upgrades in the public way and with transit. It's a great time to build a lot of this infrastructure in. Because there's such an interest in public-private partnerships everywhere, particularly in Nashville, leveraging the private sector, for the first time in history, the government, and I say the government broadly, governments are more in debt to the private sector than ever before. And so we need to get some of that money back in government. And by creating an Office of Public-Private Partnership, and by the way, it can be very small, very lean. I know in Washington they have one with 2 young, smart people. But there's an opportunity to have regular outreach to the private sector, to have real focus on how we leverage those partnerships. And the way I've seen it work best, I think, is where the office does not take over all the public-private partnership conversations, but they provide consulting services and advice basically to the agencies and help to coordinate between agencies. Because when you look at smart cities, I mean, you're talking about water, public works, planning, police with the shot spotters. I mean, everybody, NES, you're talking about everybody being involved. So having that coordinating arm can be really helpful, and that consultative ability to help walk through without having a vested interest. A Nashville fellowship program. I think we're not getting the level of talent in government. I mean, we're getting actually a little bit more in the last couple of years than we used to, but in general, fewer young, smart people are coming out of school and going into government, like over the last 10 years. And so by setting up a formal fellowship program where people serve, let's say, 12 to 18 months, they could be grad students, post-grad, they could be between undergrad and grad school, it really provides a nice funnel to getting great management talent. Once people experience working in government and how rewarding it is and the impacts you can have, they often want to stay. So it's about getting them in to government to see how it works and to get to work alongside high-level people. So we laid out the basics of a program that would bring people in on a yearly basis and give them experience in up to 3 different agencies and have them learn from high-level people, almost in a chief of staff type role. How much time do I have, Rose? Negative? Okay. Well, then we're going to go real fast. Transportation. The big thing that we came up with was to create a Metro Department of Transportation. I learned this is not a new idea. This was in Nashville Next. I want to be clear. It's not about, taking bike share away from downtown or parts of MTA away or aspects of public work. It's about creating something completely new. And you look at the population of Nashville at approaching 700,000. We have Oakland with a new DOT at 406,000 people, Chattanooga at like, 160,000 people. So you've reached the point where it's getting, complex enough that you really need, I believe, a dedicated focus on this, and where you really empower sort of a new level of transportation planning on the streets, but also recognition that the private sector is playing increasingly a huge role. You look at what's happening in Montreal, where the government is facilitating in one app all the different public and private services and one payment system, and actually providing people rewards. So that is one of our big recommendations. Public parking overall. There's a lot of cheap parking, particularly on the street, and it's not comparatively priced to garages. And basically, we are facilitating people to drive, and we're not generating the revenues that we should. So we have recommendations on the technologies that can be used, how we can equalize the pricing, and generate more revenue for the city to fund active transportation. Transit, big issue. And really, these are two sides of the same coin. To finalize a plan which will build regional support, and there's a lot of great entities, the MPO is working on this, MTA, RTA, Metro, and then of course the funding. And there's a lot in there, but one of the things that I've learned traveling around, like I was in Phoenix, very purple place. This is not a progressive or liberal place. When they got buy-in to build their first light rail line, and it was successful, and they saw the real estate values go through the roof, right? They saw the quality of life go up. Then guess what? They taxed themselves to the tune of $30 billion to build a system. So I think that's what we need to do, and we break it down into a lot more detail in the plan, but we've got to build something that people agree on, for the most part, that's going to get their buy-in. We got to do it really well, and then we got to go out and figure out how to fund a larger system. It's really that simple. And what people learn, conservative, liberal, is that they see the difference between investing in their future and like just building another highway, which is really more of a spending project, typically. And while we're doing it, we can build complete streets at the same time. We want to dramatically increase active transportation options and infrastructure for equity, safety, health, economic development. This ties into a DOT as well. But fundamentally, we have two big classifications now. We have local streets, usually smaller than this, where it is pedestrian focused. It's mixed traffic, but the cars are a guest in the space. And then we have higher speed arterial streets, and we've got to separate traffic. And there's a lot of work that has to be done to do this well. But if you do it, it'll pay huge, huge dividends. And it's amazing, when you lay out your streets differently, when you give space to certain uses, wider sidewalks, dedicated transit lanes, guess what? People psychologically think that's what I'm supposed to do. And they do it. We'd love to see Nashville's B-Cycle program be grown by fourfold. I think it's very doable. I think we can use a combination of public and private money. But the bigger the system is, the more it'll be high utility and real transportation versus more of a fun thing and something that tourists use and people in this room use. But we want to get everybody on it, and people in suits and skirts and heels. And so bigger is better. And if we do it the right way, it'll generate a lot of revenue for business. We've learned that you can generate up to 18% more revenue around bike share stations. Join the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Yes, I'm on the board, but I'm not paid. And they do great work. I know they were here recently doing the Bike Roadshow. Awesome organization. I was just representing them yesterday at the Automated Vehicle Conference. There's so much we can learn from each other, and it's basically free. And quick build design, which ties into NACTO, and the ability to try things on the street and build pilots before we make it permanent. Iterative design. The software folks have been doing it for years, but you can apply it to your streets. And last but not least, creating a great streets corridor program, which embodies a lot of things that we've talked about. Figuring out what are the corridors that need major investments. Maybe they've been run down. In DC, we had entire neighborhoods and corridors that were thriving in the 60s, and then after the race riots in the late 60s and white flight became ghettos. And so how do we bring those back? And often these corridors connect a busy job district with a poor neighborhood on the other end. So how do we redevelop that, make it beautiful, and also from an equity standpoint, how do we help everybody on the corridor to keep their homes and benefit from the improvements that we make? And there are ways to fund this. For instance, if we have a more robust transit system, you can do a bus shelter contract, as we did in Washington, where we got $85 million from Clear Channel, which we bonded against and got about $500 to $600 million, which allowed us to do, I believe, 8 major corridors over a decade. And the tax increment that came back from that is amazing. I don't have the number on me, but it's more than the $500 million, put it that way. Sorry I ran over. Thank you so much for listening. There's a lot more in the report, and I don't know if we have time for questions. All right, thanks. All right, I can take a few, or a question, or two. Anybody? Things you like, didn't like? Shock and awe? Okay. There's one.
I just have a question. So it seems like there's a lot of recommendations. How would you recommend the city start, and where does it start to?
So if you read through them, you'll see there's time to implement, and I really wanted to plot it out, but we just sort of ran out of time to plot it on a chart, but it certainly could be. But you'll see there's very short-term recommendations that could start this summer or in the fall if Metro decided, yes, we like that. You'll also see things in here that Metro is either already doing or has just started in the last couple months, and we maybe recommend some enhancements. So there's really a combination, but they're all meant to be done during Mayor Berry's term. And like for transit funding, or for building a new transit system, well, we're not going to get all of that done, obviously, in her term, but we can certainly get the funding done. We can get planning done, and we could start piloting or implementing or constructing some aspect of a transit system, depending on what's chosen. If it's BRT versus light rail, versus a Copenhagen bike network, or some combination thereof. Anything else? Oh, one more question. Yes, sir. Oh, no, I just thought of something when you said that, yes.
As professionals in the private sector, what area do we need to give to municipalities, mayors, not just Nashville, but any city, that would grant them to buy into our ideas?
Well, thank you so much for asking that, because what I wanted to do at the end was really have a call to action. And we really need, you people are influencers, you're progressive, you're forward thinking. So when this comes out, if there are things that you agree with, we need you to be advocates. We need you to go out and really sell this to people and say, this is pro-business, pro-people, pro-Nashville, pro-planet. And so, sometimes the reaction to ideas like this is, oh, that's going to cost a lot of money. We recommend, one of the other recommendations I didn't go into is adopting green streets, basically, in every project that you do. And when we were doing that in Chicago and adding bioswales and all this stuff, people said, we can't afford that. And when we did it, the project cost 21% less than other projects. So people think things cost a lot, but if you take a little bit longer term view, particularly looking at maintenance, it can be a lot cheaper. So anyway, we need you guys to dig in and then really help to sell this publicly. I think that's the biggest thing that you can do. And then of course there will be P3 opportunities. And so you're thinking on how that could work, and you may have services that you can bring to the table, how you can bring innovative financing to the table, how we can share risk with you to get things done and share the reward. I spent some time in Singapore, and my venture capital firm invested in an autonomous technology startup. I was telling the Singapore government about this in April, and they invested in the last round in May. They put in $3.6 million. So the role of government is changing. And I would come to government and bring lots of options and say, hey, we'd be willing to look at this, this, this. And it may be multiple parties coming together, the banks and the real estate folks and some big retail players and so on, and saying, hey, we think you could do X. We'd be willing to buy bike share stations if you let us do this redevelopment. If you let us build less parking, we'd be willing to build affordable housing. That's something else we talk about in the plan. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Gabe. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for coming out, and the report will be out at noon today on our website, so we look forward to reading it, and we look forward to maybe in, 6 or 9 months, we come back and we say, okay, where are we? And please give us your ideas. This is a document that's a work in motion, and we look forward to implementing some of these ideas and the various departments, and taking our challenges and putting them to good work. And once again, thanks for supporting ULI, and we'll see you at the next go-round.